Maybe the gods were never the childish part of these stories. Maybe the childish part is believing that we can remove God from human life and somehow retain all of the meaning that only His presence gave it. While most kids grew up with Harry Potter, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Greek mythology was basically my first fictional obsession. I had pretty strict parents, so I couldn't really engage in any of those fantastical worlds unless it was assigned at school. And of course, Greek mythology was a part of the curriculum. So Greek mythology was my obsession. When I say obsession, I don't mean like, oh, I just knew who Zeus was or I thought Pegasus was cute. Like, no. I mean, I completely threw myself into this world. I learned the full Greek alphabet. I competed in Greek-style Olympic Games as a child wearing like a full-on toga, okay? I learned all the characters, all the stories. I could not get enough of the drama. And not just drama, but just the graphic horror of it all. It was so shocking, and the fact we learned it in school as kids is hilarious because I seriously had stories about people being dismembered lodged into my adolescent brain long before I probably had any business knowing what any of those things were. I.e. Prometheus getting chained to a physical rock while an eagle ate his liver every single day only for it to grow back overnight, and Zeus was like, same time tomorrow, I'm gonna get that liver. Madness. Or Tantalus chopping up his own son, serving him to the gods for dinner, and somehow Demeter accidentally eats the shoulder before everybody realizes what happened, and they put the kid back together. These stories were so horrifying, sometimes beautiful, unhinged overall, but it wasn't the shock factor of these stories that made Greek mythology so addictive to me. It was actually that overseeing all of these stories and these characters are these over-involved and overactive Greek gods of Mount Olympus. They had favorites, they had enemies, they were shockingly incredibly horny, disturbingly so. Their romantic lives with one another and humans, it was so catastrophic that their personal beef spilled over onto completely unrelated human beings who now had to deal with the consequences of their actions. Mount Olympus was, I feel like, the original fraternity or sorority house because they were the epitome of hormonal teenagers acting purely off of impulse, but they had all the freaking power in the world, but they had little to no restraint at all. They were beyond unhinged, and they achieved a level of pettiness that we can only achieve like in our wildest dreams in our mortal mind. So it was really the relationship between human beings and these Greek gods is what really made this world so addicting and fascinating to me in the first place. Obviously the monsters and the quests and all the things, like they're fun, but you can put monsters in fantasy, like into any fantasy world, and they do exist in all of them. It's really these Greek gods that makes it different. Greek mythology operates the way it does because the gods are active powers within that reality. And whether one of them loves you, hates you, or barely remembers that you exist, it can actually completely change your life. If you grew up with Percy Jackson, you already understand this instinctively. Percy doesn't just happen to be an unusually gifted 13-year-old running around fighting monsters. Poseidon is his father. And that relationship determines his abilities, his protection, his default enemies, and his place inside conflicts that began long before he was born. The gods' rivalries spill into their children's lives, which means who likes you matters, who hates you matters, and who you offended can matter even more. The Odyssey exists inside that same basic supernatural structure, except Odysseus has a considerably more unstable relationship with Olympus. While Athena adores him, Poseidon would honestly very much love to drown him 10 times over probably. So while Percy was very much adored by Olympus, Odysseus has a very contentious relationship with Olympus. So when I watched Christopher Nolan's Odyssey and realized that the gods had essentially been removed altogether, okay, or translated into the material world, i.e. Poseidon was just an angry sea. Athena is reduced to Zendaya just popping up at random times, not saying a word, just being there with like a brooding stare, like a judgmental stare, So any divine action gets absorbed into nature or psychology or whatever's happening in that moment. And what really bothered me about that, it's not that this isn't accurate to Homer's The Odyssey. Adaptations, they change things, fine, whatever, okay? But what bothered me was realizing how much of Odysseus himself disappears with them. Because Athena was not randomly assigned to Odysseus as his designated guardian angel or helpful god. She is the goddess of wisdom and strategy. And Odysseus is basically her favorite type of mortal because he embodies the qualities that she values. She is actually famously associated with Metis, which is the very Greek idea of practical, crafty intelligence. Any Marvel fan, she's kind of like the Loki of the universe, right? It's not merely being smart, it's being able to read a situation, to improvise, and to lie convincingly when necessary to find the angle nobody else has. Hence why the Trojan horse is peak Odysseus and why he gained the respect of a lot of the gods, because his entire approach was essentially, why spend another 10 years with trying to smash through the front door with brute force when I can convince them to just bring me inside themselves. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus and Athena, their relationship really works because Athena isn't constantly rescuing some useless man who can't function without her. Not at all. She'll give him information, and he's very capable that he knows what to do with it. She might create like an opening, but he still has to wait for the right timing, the right moment. Essentially, their whole relationship is that game recognizes game. But unfortunately for Odysseus, the gods have favorites in both directions because, as we know, Poseidon hates his freaking guts, okay? He loathes him.
Loathe entirely.
And this is where I think the difference between Homer's world and Nolan's world in the Odyssey becomes pretty impossible to ignore, because Nolan can give Odysseus the exact same terrifying ocean that Homer does. The currents can slow him down, derail him, storms can destroy his ships entirely, the sea can kill people he loves, and everything about it can feel entirely hostile. But the sea can't hate him personally. Poseidon can. The sea in general doesn't know Odysseus, doesn't remember what he's done, doesn't care whether he ever sees Ithaca again. No. But Poseidon knows exactly who he is. He knows the reason that he hates him. He knows the beef. He's got all the receipts. And the reason that Poseidon hates him actually takes us directly into one of the most important contradictions of Odysseus' character. Odysseus, he's brilliant, right? He's resourceful, courageous, but he's also unbelievably prideful. And occasionally, he is the architect of his own misery. Polyphemus gives us both versions of him almost simultaneously, right? Odysseus comes up with the no-body plan. He blinds the Cyclops, escapes underneath the sheep, and successfully gets away. His intelligence, once again, it saved him. He's done it. He's the man with the plan. But then he can't, of course, just leave without telling him, beat him. Like, no. He wants the glory too. Surviving wasn't enough if nobody knows that it was him who did it. So Polyphemus knows exactly who blinded him, calls upon his father Poseidon personally. Poseidon answers him, and this one completely unnecessary moment of pride follows Odysseus long after the Cyclops disappears from the story. His intelligence can totally get him out of the cave, but it cannot make him sovereign over what happens afterwards. His pride has consequences precisely because there are powers he cannot control. And the same man capable of outsmarting a monster has to learn that he cannot outsmart reality itself. Homer's Odysseus wasn't impressive because Athena constantly swoops down and gets him out of trouble. That man still spent like 10 years trying to get home. So having a relationship with God was not a get out of jail free card. No, clearly divine favor has not made his life particularly convenient. Athena can help him, but she can't live his life for him. There's a couple times where Hermes, he might give him what he needs to resist Circe, but Odysseus still has to walk into Circe's house. He can receive warnings and ignore them. He still has free will entirely. And that's why we see him please one god while simultaneously pissing off another 5 minutes later. The gods don't remove human agency from the Odyssey. They give human agency a world to operate inside. There are rules and powers above Odysseus and Homer's The Odyssey. There are things that are sacred and things that are forbidden. And when a human being crosses those lines, somebody notices, and there are real consequences. Which is why I found Nolan's treatment of hospitality particularly strange, because the movie keeps like shoving down our freaking throats this idea of Zeus's law. It's like said so much in the film. Drinking game, every time you hear Zeus's law, take a shot. Actually, don't do that. You might die, okay? Because it's just beat down our throats, but it actually is pretty weightless. In Homer, Xenia doesn't matter because everybody got together and decided that hospitality was a nice social value. No, Zeus is actually its divine protector. If you violate it, you aren't just simply being rude, like you've offended him personally and you've offended something sacred, which breaking that rule actually places you in conflict with the divine order that gave the rule its authority in the very first place. Because otherwise, Zeus's law is basically just the golden rule with Zeus's name slapped on it. And I think that's a perfect example of what I think this adaptation does with gods in general. It preserves the language of a religious world while removing most of the actual religious reality underneath it. The names are there, we see similar rules, we see some of the imagery, but where the freak are the gods? Where are they?
Where are the turtles? Where are they?
Where's the actual consequence of offending one? Not some hypothetical, oh, you better do this because you might be homeless, Zeus in disguise. Where's the experience of living in a world where the divine isn't merely something that people talk about, like a threat, but something that's actually capable of answering back and influencing their reality? And actually incorporating gods would have made Nolan's Odysseus way more interesting, not less. Because now every single decision he makes places him somewhere inside that order. He isn't being dragged around like a puppet by Athena or Poseidon. He's navigating relationships with powers greater than himself while still being completely capable of making insanely stupid decisions all on his own. Athena, she might tip the scales in his favor, but then Poseidon will just throw his whole freaking body into the other side of the scale. Sometimes Odysseus gets himself out of trouble, and sometimes Odysseus is the very reason that they're in trouble. And that's also why Athena's absence changes him so much more than I think Nolan realizes, because Athena doesn't merely help Odysseus survive. She tells us how to understand him. He's cunning, but it's not presented as this dark little character defect that we're supposed to be suspicious of. She likes that about him. She likes that he's adaptable. She's actually very delighted by his craftiness. She likes that he's capable of deception when deception is useful. His craftiness puts Athena in his corner. But in the Nolan film, that exact same cunning, crafty nature becomes another piece of evidence against him. And suddenly you've taken this characteristic that made Odysseus so vibrant, that thing that made him resourceful and unpredictable and uniquely equipped to survive this crazy journey, and you flattened it into another reason for him to feel guilty and miserable, which is part of why I think Nolan's Odysseus feels so gray to me and just blah. We get this tired, depressed Matt Damon enduring terrible things in a world that mostly seems indifferent to him. It becomes a series of unfortunate events. His suffering isn't occurring within some larger order. He's trying to get home, but the forces preventing him from getting there become increasingly impersonal. And maybe that's more modern, but I don't think it's more human. I really don't, because Homer's Odysseus never needed the gods to make his journey easy. He needed the gods to make his world intelligible. His men are explicitly warned not to touch Helios's cattle. They still have the choice. They make the wrong one, and Helios demands punishment. So Zeus destroys their ship, and everyone except Odysseus dies. Hermes gives Odysseus what he needs to resist Circe's magic, but Odysseus still has to confront her. Zeus later sends Hermes to Calypso and orders her to release him, meaning Odysseus' ability to leave her island depends upon divine intervention. It was a conversation that actually happened about him and divine order. That intervention doesn't magically transport him back to Ithaca. No, he still has a journey ahead of him. That is the rhythm of this entire world. Help does not eliminate struggle, and the rules don't eliminate choice or human free will. Divine intervention doesn't eliminate human agency, even. It gives choices consequences and struggle a structure. So when Nolan takes those supernatural causes and relocates them into nature or science, human behavior, he's not simply making the world slightly less fantastical. He's changing what kind of world Odysseus lives in, which inevitably changes what kind of man Odysseus gets to be. And modern adaptations, they do this all the time. We want Greek heroes and Greek monsters. We want the tragedy, the insane stories, the violence or spectacle. But when we actually get to Greek religion or divine agency or fate, prophecies, any of those things, modern storytelling or these writers, they become so uncomfortable allowing any of that to just simply be real, even within Greek mythology's own world. So we translate it. A god becomes a psychological symbol. Providence turns into merely coincidence. There is no divine punishment. It's just natural consequences to your actions. And I think that's why the word grounded or realism has started bothering me so much. When we talk about ancient mythology, mythos, okay? AKA not real. Because what we're really saying is that we're grounding these stories in our understanding of reality. We're taking people who did not believe they lived in a closed material universe and making their stories more believable to us by putting them in one, which is especially strange because we clearly still crave everything that worldview produced. We're still obsessed with mythology, fantasy world, witches, gods, monsters, magical worlds. We want enchanted stories in a disenchanted world. So Nolan's Odyssey, it just felt so bleak to me because once you remove that larger reality and look at what Odysseus is actually left with, what is he left with? Depression. The dude is sad. And you're just like, man, this is pretty bleak, right? People die around him. He loses his men. He spends years isolated and exhausted, desperately trying to survive long enough to see his wife and son again. But also he's kind of just aimlessly letting things happen to him. There's really no drive or force really guiding him along. He's just a victim of circumstance. And he can want Ithaca more than anything in the world, but the universe itself doesn't care whether he gets there. That's the part I find totally void of purpose and meaning. Not because love or family or home suddenly become worthless if someone doesn't believe in God or in a higher power. Obviously people who don't believe in God, they can still love and sacrifice for other people. They can still create beautiful things and experience great moments in their lives. But the question is whether that meaning exists anywhere beyond us. Because if it doesn't, as Nolan's Odyssey brings to light, then Odysseus' journey matters only because Odysseus believes it matters. Ithaca matters just because Odysseus loves Ithaca. His suffering is terrible because Odysseus experiences it as terrible. But none of those things correspond to anything outside of the human beings experiencing them. And that's kind of when it stopped being like a question about the Odyssey itself for me, because we talk about our own lives in almost exactly the same way, at least in modern philosophical, ideological topics. Constantly encouraged to find our purpose, who we are, to create meaning, to decide what matters to us, figure out who we're meant to be, create that within ourselves, build lives that feel meaningful, while simultaneously being told that there may be no objective purpose behind any of it. No transcendent meaning to suffering, no guarantee of ultimate justice, nothing really waiting for us after death. And I just think there's something very strange about that contradiction. If reality truly is nothing more than matter, why are we so desperate for our lives to mean more than matter? If Christopher Nolan doesn't believe his life matters or that his work matters, why does he even keep making art? Why make movies? Why does any of it matter? And that's where obviously my Christianity, my Catholicism, it obviously changes the way I look at this. And don't get me wrong, like, I know Greek gods and Christian and, Jesus could not be any more different, obviously. Their pettiness, their lustful, they're just entirely different. They just can't even be compared at all. Like, Christianity makes a radically different claim about the nature of God. But both worldviews begin with an assumption that human beings are not the highest reality that exists. And Christianity actually goes much further than simply saying that there's something or someone above us, because we actually say that there's someone above us who knows us, who wants to love us, who wants to transform us and do this day-to-day life with us. Very much actively involved the way that Greek gods are, just minus all the psycho shit. But whereas Greek gods avoid all suffering, our Savior and our God, our Jesus, he entered suffering himself with us. So that changes what human existence is. Our choices have significance beyond the immediate consequences that we can see. Goodness isn't merely something that we collectively decided was preferable or what was socially acceptable. Love isn't exhausted by the chemical process accompanying it. It's not just butterflies, or it's not limited to just a time frame. Even suffering can be redeemed rather than simply being endured or something that you survived. And most importantly, death doesn't get the final word, which is why, weirdly enough, all this brings me back to what I actually love about Homer's Odysseus. It's not that Odysseus, he masters the world around him. He learned to navigate a universe he could never master. He's constantly running into the limits of his own power, whether it's a monster or a god that he can't overpower, or even seeing how his own mistakes and his own pride creates consequences that he can't undo. Because the supernatural wasn't something that Homer sprinkled in over the adventure to make it more exciting. It was part of what the adventure itself meant. And I think Nolan's Odysseus is actually a pretty perfect demonstration of what happens when you make that trade. He hasn't become more autonomous because Athena is gone. He's become more alone. Poseidon's hatred becomes just bad weather on the seas, bad luck. Sacred laws remain, but the gods who gave those laws weight barely seem to exist, if at all. And honestly, what's left is an Odysseus that's just as recognizable as Christopher Nolan's Ocean is recognizable as Poseidon. The shape is still there. Personality behind it definitely is not. And when I think back to being this little kid completely obsessed with these stories, I pretty much knew which parts were fantastical that I wasn't supposed to necessarily believe in. Like, I knew that Cyclops weren't real, that sirens weren't real, Poseidon wasn't sitting at the bottom of the Mediterranean personally ruining someone's commute home. Like, no, those were all the fantastical parts. But maybe the thing that's actually become hardest for the modern world to believe is something much more fundamental. That human life takes place in relationship with something beyond itself. That our actions can have meaning beyond their immediate consequences. That there is something, someone above us, that we are not sovereign. That's ultimately why taking gods out of the Odyssey bothers me far more than like losing a few mythological characters. I don't just want to see Liam Neeson coming down as Zeus or Voldemort as Hades. That's not what I'm looking for. Like, it bothers me because somewhere along the way, we did the same thing to ourselves. And this story shows me so much where society is as a whole. We took the divine out of our own understanding of reality and called the world more realistic or progressive for it. But then we kept searching for purpose and meaning, or even transcendence, as though something within us never quite accepted the world that we'd created. And maybe that's why we remain so fascinated by stories from people who never believed they lived in that world to begin with. Maybe the gods were never the childish part of these stories. Maybe The childish part is believing that we can remove God from human life and somehow retain all of the meaning that only His presence gave it.